Solange is joining us now for the press review. You're starting with what is obviously the top story today, Solange, Turkey's ground and air assault on Syria. Turkish press, how are they covering this today?
Well, they're covering it with a lot of praise. The daily Türkiye pegs Operation Peace Spring, which is what the Turks are calling it, as an offensive against terrorism, be it from the Kurdish militia or the Islamic State. It is, quote, for the mother country, the front page says, and the paper asks Allah to bless the Turkish troops. Now, the daily Sabah is much along the same editorial line. They say the military push is a question of national sovereignty, one that became necessary and was provoked by what they see as terrorist fractions of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or the PKK. So high praise there coming from the Turkish press.
Well, much of the international community, of course, is pointing the finger at Donald Trump, saying that he essentially green-lit the Turkish offensive after he agreed on Monday to withdraw American troops from the area. But Solange, how is the American press then covering this attack?
Well, Donald Trump's sort of all over the place statements have been spilling a lot of ink in the U.S. The New York Times takes us through the green lighting, then the tweets by Trump saying invading Syria would be a bad idea. And now he's saying that the Kurds didn't help the Americans in Normandy during World War II, as if they were some sort of second-class ally. But the Times and most of the mainstream media is clear the Kurds are just as much a U.S. ally as any other group that fought along U.S. soldiers. For the Washington Post, Trump has, quote, a reduced understanding of the region, and his assertions that the Kurds and the Turks are, quote, natural enemies. For them, that's dead wrong. Now, in an op-ed, the paper says that normalizing relations and finding a political solution could have been, or let's be optimistic, could be, quite possible. For the paper, the real driving force here is not a security threat or creating a zone for the Syrian refugees to go to. For the Post, the real culprit here is the Turkish president's political vulnerability after massive losses this past summer in elections.
And what about the Arab papers? How are they covering this?
Against all odds, Erdogan attacks. And that's how the Lebanese paper L'Orient Le Jour characterizes the attacks. They highlight the multiple countries across the globe that have condemned them, for it opens the door for the Islamic State to return in force, end quote. The British paper The Independent also criticizes the Turkish attacks on the Kurds. Kurds, they highlight, that have been, quote, abandoned by Donald Trump. The paper also raises concerns about the plight of the thousands of people who are fleeing the fighting.
And finally, in this one, the French press as well, of course, covering the story.
Yeah, Libération is quite direct in its blame. It condemns what it calls Erdogan's dirty war. The paper says the Turkish president took advantage of Washington's wishy-washiness and that France and European nations are watching all this somewhat helplessly and in near silence. And in the paper's editorial, they go through the multiple times in the past that the Kurds have, quote, been endlessly betrayed, be it after the First World War or more recently after the Gulf War. Now, for L'Humanité, which has long supported the Kurdish cause, the Kurds are being handed over to the, quote, madness of Erdogan. That Donald Trump's decision rings the bell for, quote, the withering statue of the leader of the free world, end quote. For Luma, which calls for an immediate end to the incursion, the spiraling into war has begun.
Well, to try to lighten the mood very slightly anyway, Solange has also been looking at the cartoon. Serious subject, of course, but at least it's a slightly whimsical way of looking at it, I suppose.
Yeah, I couldn't leave you with these bleak analyses of the state of the world. So let's take a look at a cartoon by USA Today. It's by Andy Marlette, and you have a Turkish tank and two soldiers talking, with one saying, quote, if I knew it was that easy to get the Americans to abandon its allies, we would have offered Trump dirt on Joe Biden sooner. Referring here naturally to the impeachment proceedings and the Ukrainian controversy. Now let's take a look at another one. This one is by Erman. It also makes reference to the impeachment, and you have the Kurdish fighter relaying the message, quote, he's sorry, but he has an impeachment to worry about. So there's a little bit of satire there from the Tribune de Genève.
Yeah, mixing those two stories up inevitably, perhaps. Thanks very much, Solange Mougin, with the papers here on France 24.